Hello everyone and welcome back to the finals of the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour. This is match 5, and if you don't know what's been happening so far, the first 4 matches were really awesome, and the result is now equal. So 2 points Magnus, 2 points Hikaru, and now this is match 5. And we have a lot of interesting games that we can show today, but we're gonna start with the Armageddon game, which means that after 6 games, after 4 games of Rapid and 2 games of Blitz, the result was a tie, and now we have the Armageddon game. And tomorrow we're gonna show the other 2 games, 1 or 2 games, still not deciding, and I'm not gonna tell you how the games went, not to spoil too much, but that's why we're starting with Armageddon. So Magnus, as he qualified to the grand final by winning one of the events, he gets to choose which color of the pieces he wants in the Armageddon, and here he chose white. Everyone thought he was going to choose black because everyone chooses black in Armageddon, but he chose white. I will mention why in my next video, but not for now. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with d4, which means in Armageddon Magnus needs a win, and if it's a draw, then Hikaru wins the match. So knight to f6, we have c4, e6, and the knight to c3. Magnus invites Hikaru to go for the Nimzo Indian, which Hikaru does. So bishop to b4, and now a3, challenging the bishop. We have captures, and now c5. So the same-ish variation of the Nimzo is on the board. We have e3 and knight to c6. Bishop to d3, and now we have castles. We have knight to e2, and now comes b6. So preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop. We have e4 by Magnus, and now knight to e8. In expectance of f4, Hikaru makes room for the f5 pawn. So castles by Magnus, and now bishop to a6. Putting pressure on the c4 pawn, you want to play knight to a5 and bring another attacker to the c4 pawn. So f4 by Magnus, and now f5 by Hikaru, immediately stopping that f pawn. We have e captures on f5, e captures, and now d captures on c5. So Magnus opening up files. He does have the 2 bishops, but as Peter Leko said, the pawn structure is pretty weird. So b captures, Hikaru recaptures, and now bishop to e3. And okay, now the bishop pair is very active. This pawn is under attack. The knight is coming to g3. You can attack it again. The c5 pawn is under attack. So Hikaru defends it with the d6, and now knight to g3. Magnus goes after the f5 pawn. We have g6. Hikaru defends it, and now rook to e1. We have knight to f6. Now, as these squares have been weakened, the knight can come to g4 or e4 if needed. And here comes bishop to f2. Opening up the e-file for the rook, so some nice rook lifts might be possible, and Hikaru stops it with queen d7. This position has been reached once before. In 2013, young Krzysztof Duda tried rook to b8 here, and got a draw with the move, but here queen to d7 by Hikaru is a new move, so already as of move 17, we have a completely new game. So let's see how Magnus deals with this. He goes knight f1. Probably the idea is to shift the knight over to d5, which is a nice central square. So knight to a5 with a double attack on the c4 pawn, and now we have bishop to h4. Now probably going after the knight to remove one of the defenders of the d5 square. Maybe then you can get your knight all the way to d5. However, we have rook a to e8, offering a rook trade here. Magnus trades once, captures, and now bishop captures on f6. So the knight is eliminated. Rook captures on f6, and now queen to f3 with ideas. Maybe if the knight captures, then you can go queen d5 check, claim it, as the bishop also attacks d4. However, it's not really an issue. Hikaru could go for this, and even if queen d5 check, you can block with queen f7. Everything is nicely defended. If captures, then captures. Everything is perfectly fine. However, Hikaru first just prepares it. Rook to e6. He wants to get his rook to e1. He's not worried about this pawn. It's very unlikely that you will be able to guard this pawn, so he'll probably pick it up later. So rook to b1 by Magnus, now with ideas of bringing the rook over to the back rank if the queen moves, and only now does Hikaru go after the pawn. Bishop captures on c4, we have bishop captures and knight captures. So Hikaru is now up a pawn and also attacking the a3 pawn. So Magnus advances it with a4, and now king g7. Hikaru up a pawn. Now he just needs to make sure that Magnus doesn't have any attacking chances, and all will be well. And here we have queen to b7 check by Magnus. Very interesting was rook to b7 check, and if king f6 g4, However, incredible as it is, the king is very safe here. For example, if you go rook to e1, g5 check, you have the e6 square. And even though the black king has no squares that he can use, the king is actually very safe here. You don't have ways of attacking the black king while it's on e6, although it looks incredibly weird. So what you could do after king to f6, you could go rook captures on a7, create a passed a pawn, but then again rook e1, game continues, and it's you know, anything can happen. But Magnus doesn't like a rook to b7 check, so instead he goes queen to b7 check, and now of course Hikaru blocks. Queen to f7, now not allowing queen captures on a7. We have queen to a6, and now rook to e7 with a double defense on the a7 pawn. Rook to b8, as now Nakamura left the defense of the back rank, and now king h6. Hikaru finds a nice safe haven for his king. We have h3, now maybe hoping for some g4, g5 ideas in the future if possible, but now queen e6 by Hikaru, with ideas of trading the knights. Knight d2 combined with queen to e3 check might be coming. So rook to a8, now Magnus wants to eliminate this pawn. So you can see that Magnus is wasting a lot of time with this plan, queen b7 check, queen a6, bringing the rook to b8 to here just to win the a7 pawn. If he wanted to win it, he could have done it right away with rook b7 followed by captures instead. But okay, knight to d2 by Hikaru. Nice tactical shot, because now if the knight is traded, then queen check trades off the knights, and then the rook also comes into the attack, of course completely winning for Hikaru. So instead we have rook to d8 by Magnus, putting pressure on the d6 pawn as well. And now we have knight captures on f1. And now the problem is you don't have time to capture with the king because queen e1 is checkmate. So Magnus forced to go back with the queen, and now Hikaru just goes queen to e3 check, king h2, and now rook to e4, going for queen captures on f4, and now of course he wants to trade queens. So rook captures on d6 by Magnus, and now a queen trade occurs. Queen captures, we have captures, and now a5. Magnus continues pushing his a pawn, and still his plan consists of eliminating the a7 pawn and then advancing his a5 pawn. So again, claiming that with that rook b7 check was the way to go, if this was the plan. So rook to c4, Hikaru also wants to create a passed pawn, and now rook to a6. We have rook captures on c3, rook captures on a7, and now rook to a3. Hikaru now puts a rook behind Carlsen's passed pawn, and king g1. Magnus now needs to bring the king into the game, and in this endgame, in this rook and pawn endgame, he's down a pawn. Which is usually not a problem, but it is a big problem if you have to win the game to win the match, as once again this is Armageddon. So c4, Hikaru starts pushing his passed pawn, and now king f2. Rook a2 check. If Magnus wants to move the king, then he loses the king side pawns. If he wants to defend them, then the c pawn just marches down the board. So king e3, Magnus decides to abandon the g2 pawn. Hikaru captures it, and now queen d4, king d4. We have rook to h2 going for this pawn as well, and now a6. We have rook captures on h3 and king captures on c4. And now Hikaru with 3 pawns on the king side, and Magnus with a very well advanced pawn on the queen side. And if he could just push it a little bit further, that would be great. However, Hikaru is in time to play rook to a1. So here we have rook d7, rook to a1 going after the pawn, and now king b5 defending the passed pawn. We have king to g5. Hikaru offers up this pawn so he can just start pushing his own pawn. And rook to d4 now. Magnus doesn't allow Hikaru to advance with the king, but of course f4. And here we have rook to a4 by Magnus, saying that, okay, now I have a rook behind a passed pawn, and I want you to move the rook and push the pawn. However, this is now winning for Hikaru, and I'm sure you know why, but just in case, feel free to pause the video and win the game for Hikaru while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on precisely calculating all the way to the end game. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on a4. And now, of course, king captures on a4 was played. We have f3 by Hikaru, and now a7. We have f2 and now a8. Magnus queens first, but it's of a little comfort as Hikaru also queens, and he is still up 2 pawns. So here, Magnus played queen d5 check. We have queen to f5, and now Magnus played queen to d2 check, probably to get Hikaru to end the game quickly. And of course, Hikaru just blocked with queen to f4 check, nicely connecting and it was in this position that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, and match 5 goes to Hikaru. So this means Hikaru leads 3-2 in matches, and we have 2 more matches happening. Or if Hikaru wins the next one, then he's the champion, and Magnus now needs to win the second match to force match 7 and then try and win this whole thing. So we'll see what happens. Here, of course, you resign because after the queens are traded off, you're just up 2 connected past pawns. There's no playing this. So yeah, really amazing stuff. Like I said, there were a lot of games possible to show here. I'm gonna try and show at least 1 or 2 tomorrow before the start of the 6th match. And yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Victor Pessoa, Demilo Gomez, Ganesh Seshadri, John Klaas for Konstantin Klopenkov, and Kelly McDonald for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. And I would also like to wish Benjamin Hauberger for a happy birthday. Wish you all the best, and you know, may you have a great year, and you know, everything that goes with it, and many victories over the board. So once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the finals, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.